watching HuffPost Live. I'm Alona Minkowski. It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's a drone. Today we discuss the FAA's new drone task force, anti-drone protests in Nevada, and drones that might save your life from an avalanche. So step into the drone zone with us. Now, while we're talking about law enforcement and drones, I also want to bring up the military blimp that crash landed this week. On Wednesday, an unmanned U.S. military surveillance blimp went rogue, untethering from a base in Maryland. It then floated over Pennsylvania, taking out power lines and drifting more than 100 miles. Patrick, what do we know about this blimp and what was it surveilling in the first place?
Right. So this is a system that's called the J-lens, and there's two of these. Technically, it's called an aerostat, which is a blimp that is tethered to the ground, or at least it's supposed to be tethered to the ground. It's produced by Raytheon, and there are a couple that they work together. There's a radar for detecting fire from missiles that are heading towards, theoretically, the Washington, D.C. area. Raytheon has billed it as something that is also capable of detecting very large drones. They've used it successfully in Afghanistan, not for detecting missiles, but outfitted with a camera. The one that has been flying over Aberdeen Proving Grounds, two systems, flying over Aberdeen Proving Grounds since near the beginning of the year. These are outfitted not with cameras, but with radars, operated primarily by NORAD. And this is an incredibly controversial program. The entire program cost is $2.5 billion for what is roughly two blimps. In terms of missiles, well, you know, it's tested well in White Sands, but we haven't had any missile attacks against Washington, D.C. In April, when a single individual in a bicycle-powered helicopter flew from Pennsylvania to the steps of the Capitol. NORAD hasn't been able to give any answers as to why these blimps failed to see that. They've testified that perhaps it was off that day. They turned it off in the case of bad weather. Or it's just not, the sensor on it, the radar, can't actually pick up stuff like a guy on a bicycle in the air flying to the steps of the Capitol. So there's going to be a lot of questions about why we even had these J-lens in the first place. You know, it's so odd is that somebody asked the Secretary of Defense about this, Ash Carter, and he said, oh, they've come loose in Afghanistan. It's something that can happen in bad weather. As though we don't have that in Maryland. So I don't think that this is the last you'll see of runaway blimp.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole thing is certainly is ridiculous. You know, it even led to Edward Snowden tweeting, I should know better by now, but even I still have trouble believing that runaway surveillance blimp is actually a thing. Because you just think about the money that has been spent here and, of course, the questions about why something that's really meant to be used abroad is being used on U.S. soil. And as you mentioned, not really doing its job at that. So, Patrick, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, the United States increasingly relies on drones to conduct surveillance and launch lethal strikes abroad. But what many may not realize is that most of the drones are controlled from a military base in Indian Springs, Nevada. Personnel at the Creech Air Force Base are responsible for drone operations in Afghanistan and Pakistan, sending their commands via transatlantic fiber optic cables to Germany, where they are then transmitted to drones via satellite. Now, on Wednesday night, a group of 20 anti-drone protesters gathered at Creech, demanding that the facility be shut down. The group says that 5 of their members were able to penetrate the base, delivering a letter to the base commander after being met by heavily armed military personnel. And the protest came the same day that a Las Vegas judge dropped charges against 14 anti-drone activists who were arrested for protesting outside of Creech last March. Joining us now with more is one of the protesters who took part in both actions, Mauro Oliveira. Mauro, thank you for joining us today.
It's really good to be here. Thank everybody for your work.
And so tell us a little bit about Wednesday's action and what the reason was for it, and if you consider it a success.
Wednesday's action was at the end of 3 days of trials at Las Vegas courts, which go back to the March arrest of 34 activists that range from 14 years old to 80 years old in a gathering at Creech Air Force Base that we called Camp Justice. And the Nevada Desert Experience, Veterans for Peace, Code Pink, Catholic workers, many people of clergy, and I think the elder priests were 80 years old. And there were women priests there too. There was over 150 people there, and after a week of protesting, there was the arrest of 34 of us, and through different procedures of law, we ended up with 14 in court this week in 3 days of trials, which the first trial was Friar Jerry Zawada, who's in his 70s. And the government failed to produce their case that the chain of command from the government to Las Vegas Metro Police was properly done. So they lost the first case, and then the next 13 were dismissed over the next 3 days. So that's good for us, but it doesn't bring drones on trial, which is why we do this, why we protest, why we get arrested. So law enforcement that we're not going to stop until this program is done. Drone assassinations are illegal. Most of the world hates us for this, and we are creating more enemies with it, and we could go all into that. But on Wednesday night, we marched with about 20 of us towards the gate of Creech Air Force Base for about 800 feet or so with a loud bullhorn after dark. And we were really surprised that no one came to greet us. And we got as far as the white line that we had been arrested for at Beale, or I'm sorry, at Creech in March. And we got past that line, we got all the way to the gate, and still no one was there. So we walked into the base. And,
so why do you think that is? Do you think that it's because of the decision that was handed down?
I don't know. I think it's similar to why a blimp would be floating around in the eastern United States. Our military and our technology can really be bad at times. And that night there wasn't anybody watching. And after 5 days of Code Pink being at that gate in the morning and in the afternoon, why they wouldn't have security there and we could get through. Well, they came rushing up, and when they did, they came out of their vehicles, M16s drawn.
Now, Creech released a statement in response to what happened on Wednesday, and they wrote, individuals without military affiliation approached the entry control point, but did not gain access to the installation. The protesters were verbally directed back to the demarcation line and eventually departed.
That is not how it happened. No, we did penetrate the gate. We could have closed their gate for them. There's no doubt we could have closed their own gate. It was behind us. There was no one there. There was no one in front of us. We could have easily closed that gate. Once the MPs came to us, we negotiated that we would back up, no problem, if he would promise us that he would deliver that letter. And that is what happened. And we backed up to the line, and we waited there on the military side of the line. We stayed on base property until we were absolutely sure that we were going to get our demands met. And then Metro was very happy to let it go at that, and there were no arrests, and we all shook hands, and it was pretty beautiful in the end. I mean, we love those kids. The guy who had an M16 in front of me looked like he was younger than my youngest,
Yeah.
He's
Well,
a teenager.
in that sense, Mauro, too, why is it that then that you go to Creech rather than protesting in Washington, D.C., right, or going to some of the rallies of people like Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, any of the candidates that are running for 2016 right now, all of whom have not said, none of whom have said, I guess I should say, that they will stop using drones for lethal purposes?
Well, I would be there if I had the kind of funds to do that. Beale and Fort Beale is in my reach, and that's where they do reconnaissance for the Creech drones that do the killing. So I go to Creech and to Beale because it's in my reach. Now I expect activists in D.C. to do their job too. None of the people that I work and the people that I mentioned, we don't get paid. This is out of our heart. We cannot stand this anymore. This is our tax dollar. This is an extension of our love. So we have to be there. And like I say, that's within my range. Anything that's in my range, I go to.
Got it. All right, Mauro, thank you for joining us today.